present case of judges. I will hold up a sign for the last 10, 5, and 2 minutes, as well as for the last 30 seconds of the presentation. During the last 10 seconds, I will indicate with my fingers the number of seconds remaining. If you have not finished your presentation after 20 minutes, you will be stopped in order to proceed with the Q&A period. A Q&A period of a maximum of 5 minutes is allocated to the jury at the end of your presentation. Please note that at any time you cannot say or refer the name of your university.
Bonjour à tous, merci d'être là aujourd'hui. Je me présente, mon nom c'est Tommy. Je suis avec Camille et Tony, on est TTC Consultant. Et je vais tout de suite laisser la parole à Tony qui va commencer la présentation.
Thank you very much, Tommy. So before we begin, we just want to look at what we took into consideration when evaluating the different issues that we found within your family situation. The first thing was to minimize and postpone any tax consequences that would have taken place and evaluate the nature of the overall structure of these decisions. So that was our fundamental decision when coming to analyze any of our alternatives. So to start off, we're going to be looking at the acquisition of Eurolife franchise. We'll discuss the advice regarding the sale of assets and the potential litigation that might cause. We'll then jump into different tax planning tips encompassing all the different issues that we noticed, summarizing some of the benefits that we've realized that you can take advantage of. We'll go into advice regarding your preferred shares. And finally, we'll discuss the available options regarding the money lent to Danielle. So first things first, in terms of the acquisition of Eurolife, there are different things that we took into consideration. So in terms of your ability to self-manage and own your own business, we thought this was a clear advantage for you to take advantage in this situation, as it would give you the opportunity to manage a pharmaceutical company. Next, there's several years of experience that you have within that, so that'll be another bonus point for you to take advantage of. And also, we recognized that the franchise itself was widely available in Europe, so this could be an advantage situation for you as well. In terms of cons, the time frame is fairly limited. You have 10 days to make a decision, so we want to make sure that when you are making a decision that you take into consideration all the alternatives that are available to you. That being said, there are other franchises out there that offer competitive prices and different features that you might not have yet looked at. So we really want you to look at those options before jumping the gun. Jumping into the next slide in terms of our analysis, we really want to look at the financing of this and look at the tax consequences of this project itself from the franchise. So there are a variety of ways that you could finance this project. The first being the cash that you have on hand, amounting to $10,000. The disposition of your personal investments, which might result in some capital gains that we'll look into deferring for you. Next, that's the disposition of preferred shares that I'll jump into later of design business. And lastly, a possible loan that you might be able to look into as well. So in terms of our analysis, we looked at the franchise fee solely, but do recognize that there are some startup costs to consider. But as the agreement did not take that into consideration, we wanted to make sure that the base was covered and that that was essentially our main focal point for this analysis. So in terms of the cash on hand, that will result in $10,000, which doesn't really cover the entire amount. So we looked into the investment disposition. So there's a lot of investments that you have on hand, which will give you about $425,000 of proceeds. That being said, that will be taxed in terms of a capital gain. So the rate we use is 50% of the taxable capital gain, which amounted to about $31,000. So that's going to take away from your overall cash flow that project will be able to provide to you. So that being said, we really recommend that you look into the investments that you have right now and consider your future retirement goals, as that will be a key factor in terms of determining if you should go ahead or not with the financing portion of this franchise. Jumping into the next section, in terms of the preferred shares of Gestion Mélanie. So that's the shares that you own of Melanie's corporation. Melanie right now wants to have sole control over this business. So we looked at different ways for you to defer the tax on this gain. If you would dispose of the shares, it would result in a capital gain of $9,500, which would be taxable at 50% within your net incomes. And we wanted to really look at the overall tax impact of this. So jumping into our next analysis, we thought of two different options that were available to you that you could consider in terms of deferring the tax that you would experience on this amount. The first one would be to reinvest the $9,500 into a qualified small business corp. The assumption we made with Melanie is that it's a fairly small business, it's privately owned by her, and that there aren't many investments made within that company. It's solely for design. So it would have already been a qualified small business corporation. That being said, you could reinvest a portion of that proceeds into another qualified small business company, and that'll allow you to defer the gain on that. The only issue is that your ACV will be reduced, so when you do dispose of those shares later on, you will be taxed for that portion because the ACV will be reduced. Another option would be to invest the proceeds into a portion of the RRSPs. This is not a direct link in terms of reducing the capital gain, but instead would act as an income reducing tool for this year and kind of minimize the capital gain that would go into your income. But again, it wouldn't be directed, it would be more of a credit in terms of your taxable income. So that being said, we recommend to really reinvest and defer all the gains into a qualified small business corporation, as this will allow you to defer the gain completely. So now I'm going to hand the floor over to Cami, or Tommy, who will discuss the following points.
Thanks, Tony. You mentioned to us about your real estate asset that you were worried about legal liabilities that could arise. So one of the points that we started out with is to determine at this point if the company was eligible for a lifetime capital gains exemption. And it wasn't, because there's $300,000 in investment overall out of approximately $1 million in assets. So therefore 70% was used at the moment for this. So I just wanted to mention this so you see our thought process going into the analysis. The advice regarding the location, what we wanted to do is we wanted to set up a trust. So it's another legal entity. Therefore, you would meet your goal of not having potential litigation that you mentioned with your meeting with Geneviève. And we recommend to use a discretionary trust. Therefore, you could elect which amount you'd be able to distribute to either you, your wife, or kids. And you would do the transfer using Section 85 and transfer it using the tax cost, therefore UCC of the building of $564,000. You would therefore avoid all tax consequences upon transfer, and yeah, so your tax consequences would be nil. The advantages of using a trust compared to a company are basically the income splitting. That's one of the main issues that we wanted to look at. You mentioned that your wife doesn't have any income right now, so we wanted to use the $10,000 credit that is available to her, and she's not using it right now. So potential income splitting from the rental income generated from the asset. It's also going to meet your goal for potential litigation, as mentioned before. And in terms of lifetime capital gains exemption, if the building increases in value later on, you'd be able to split your lifetime capital gains exemption with your wife and kids, depending on what value the building might reach. And yeah, also one of the tax planning that we thought of, you mentioned that Sylvain is currently in school and you pay for his education. So using the discretionary trust, you would be able to elect some money to him in order to basically reduce the tax consequences, because he has the $10,000 basic personal credit available to him. Yeah, and then we were going to look at different tax planning tips that we saw along the case. The first one that is really important is the principal residency exemption. If you mentioned that you might want to move from Bromont to Montreal or South Shore, and if you do sell your house, it's important that you elect the principal residency exemption to exempt all the gains that would result. In this case, it was $100,000 from the house. Also, you have unused RRSP that you could take advantage of. Currently, you have $22,000 for your own RRSP, and you also have your spousal RRSP that is $42,000 of unused room, and you can contribute to our RRSP in order to reduce your tax burden. Other tax planning tips, you mentioned that you're going to relocate your home. We determined that from Bromont to Montreal, the 40-kilometer rule wasn't met, so therefore you wouldn't be able to get some of the advantages that you would otherwise have gotten if that rule was met. And also you mentioned that if you do go with the franchise, you're going to have $20,000 from Eurolife, and you're going to have to include that in your income for the year. So now I'm going to pass it on to Camille, who's going to discuss other tax planning that we've seen throughout the case.
So our next planning tip was the RESP. So you mentioned that Christian and Ellen wanted to pursue their studies, and you had about $200,000 of expenses that would occur shortly. So the RSP would allow you to grow some money tax-free for your children, which would be able to take out this money and be taxed only when taken out. The important thing to notice also is that with this type of plan, you don't get a deduction, and also you would also get a contribution from the government, and you have a 50,000 limit per RSP, so which means you have 2 children, so you'd have a 100,000 limit. Another tip we had was also to transfer your tuition tax credit from Sylvain each year to the parents. So the maximum would be $5,000 that would be transferred to the parents, considering the high amount Eve is making per year. Okay, another tax planning tip. So we noticed evaluating the TFSA, the amount that you contributed, the maximum is supposed to be $5,000 per year since 2009. However, we noticed an over-contribution of $9,400. So this means a penalty of 1% per month would have applied the entire year, so about $2,000 per year of penalty. So we would suggest reducing your TFSA amount to $20,000, your maximum amount available since 2009. Also, we noticed for the automobile allowance, it's a small one, but you have 2 cents over, which is allowed for the first 5,000 kilometers, and 8 cents for the excess, which would be included in income. Also, for childcare expenses, normally this would be deducted by the lower income spouse. However, since your wife is not making any money, this would be a consideration only when income would be attributed to her with the trust we mentioned earlier, the structure. Okay, and finally, for Danielle's loan evaluation, so you mentioned that you made a loan to her of $25,000, which she will not be able to repay because of eventual bankruptcy. So first of all, we noted that first of all the assets would go to the bank first, but excess assets may be available after that, which could be sold. So maybe you could get a little bit of money for that. If not, typically the tax consequences would be that this would result in a loss. However, likely that CRA will inspect the nature of the loss and your intentions. So you would need to ensure that maybe you had a contract or something signed that allows you to prove that you actually have this loss of $25,000. So I'll hand it off to Tony for the conclusion.
Thank you very much, Tammy. So in terms of tying together all the points that we addressed today, there are a few things that we want you to really take home and consider. The first thing being the disposal of investments to finance your franchising fee. So as we mentioned earlier, that's another way for you to really consider a way to evaluate that in terms of financing the franchise fee. But you also have to consider your future options in terms of retirement and how you want to deal with that. Next thing was the use of a trust to transfer real estate. So this is an awesome way for you to postpone any of the liabilities that you may have in terms of exposure from these assets. So it's an option that we considered valid in terms of rolling over these assets into the trust. Nextly, in terms of the RRSP contribution and the TFSA, we recommend taking a closer look at these options As Kemi mentioned, there was an overcontribution amount within the TFSA, which might be subject to some penalties on your end. So really, the advice, take a step back and see what are the options in terms of investing that. And lastly, reinvest a portion of the proceeds from the preferred shares into another qualifying small business corporation, as this will ultimately postpone and defer the gain until a later date for your shares. Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I have a quick question with regard to the acquisition of the franchise. Did you know, I haven't heard, I'm not sure I've heard, what type of structure in which you will exploit this franchise?
Well, in terms of the structure that's available, one thing that we looked at, but we didn't really consider it because there was no options available in terms of the client's end, was whether to set up a corporation externally or to have it as a sole proprietorship. Those are two of the options available.
Ideally, at first, you may want to have it as a sole proprietorship, so therefore, if you have losses occurring in the few years in the business, you'd be able to use those losses against any income that you have personally from either your the rental or any other incomes that you generate.
Is there any disadvantage to use a sole proprietorship?
Well, that was one of the main advantages.
Not disadvantage, sure.
Disadvantage? I mean, you have legal liabilities that you'd have using the sole proprietorship, so therefore they could go after your own house or other asset that you might own not in a corporation.
Okay, I have a second question. Let's say I don't want to dispose of my funds in my business, in my GESCO business. So which other financing option would be the best for me for the acquisition of the franchise?
Well, we looked at the loan as well as being another option, as you do have many assets that are available. We think that would be an excellent way to back the loan up. And in terms of anything else that we might have considered?
And for tax perspective, what would be the advantage of having an external loan?
Well, if the loan was used for business purposes, you can deduct the interest from that. That'd be another option for you.
Okay.
I really like the structure with the real estate and the trust. Could I do the same with the franchise?
I mean, it could be a possible option to look at for the trust. Maybe you'd be able to also do some income splitting with the trust. I think it could be a feasible option.
Thank you very much.
Merci.
Beer.